I just wanted to really thank everybody, not thank everybody, but thank the Lord, because when we were here April, there's people here today that were here in April, and they went off to continue to study, and there are others here that were not here in April that have been studying, and every one of us is a testimony to who brought us here, that it was the Lord that brought us here. And that we're hearing His voice, and it's my prayer that everyone here and everyone that is in this movement would continue to hear that voice and follow it, even if they don't understand everything, that they follow that voice, because He will continue to increase the light. And I'm just thankful. It breaks out in moments of joy just to see what the Lord is doing. So we're going to continue where we did yesterday, and I'll be able to clarify the things that I messed up on yesterday as well. Plus, these particular notes, these are the ones that are in your book, but you also had an additional note. What had happened was, last week I think it was, when we were doing I think it was the summary on the midway points, and Brother Victor brought up, what about 1951? And that was a midway point that was brought up in a presentation in Romania, which was not brought up in the Brazil classes that we went through, and it had a different application. So I had to scramble. I already had the notes printed and go figure out what that midway point, at least so we could add it in. But in the process of doing that, I found that what you have printed in your notes, a 1954 date to 2014 being 63. And like I was saying yesterday, a lot of times I will add up just to make sure I'm doing it right, just to make sure that it is right, because we all ought to be verifying the things we're learning, right? Instead of just go out and teach them. But I don't always verify everything, and I may have verified and then forgot what I've done, because we go through so many during the week. So anyways, so on the little extra pages of notes that I gave you that replace a couple of pages in here, we're going to go through those. So the 1954 was a midway point that she used on the line in the study that we did last week. And we did that, we showed some of that yesterday. But she did say in those presentations that there are other midway points. And the correction will be that some of there are these events and you have midpoints, but not every midpoint is connected to 2014 via a symbol of the 2520. So they might give us information for 2014, the midpoint, but not all of them are connected via a symbol of the 2520. When I say that, I mean the 63, the 126, the 151. And so when I found that out, I went back to go watch the video, both videos, to watch them. And it did say 1954. It did have the line 63, and I was like, that was me that did not do the math on that particular one. And I know it wasn't her that was wrong. There's a lot of numbers up here and a lot of lines, and they're very hard. God is trying to work with us to see all these different lines, all these different structures, and make it all come together, the wheels within wheels, as I think Sister Victoria was talking about, so that they're no longer chaos in our mind, so that we can maybe, going forward, learn to speak them plainly and clearly. So anyway, I went ahead and did my board work in advance. I'm not real good with the board. I'm used to being behind the scenes. So I put it up there, and we'll go through it bit by bit as we go through it. And the numbers are correct up here when I replaced them. So we began by looking at 2014 and then started connecting it to past history. So we, looking down here at 2014, started looking at all these past histories and find out that some might have been confusing, especially when we're relating to all those histories. And it does get confusing when you're going through it. So 2014 is a midpoint between 2001 and 2019. I color-coded a couple of them, so that we'll kind of go through that in a little bit. But the midpoints, just went ahead and put all in black. They were midpoints. And each midpoint has your two bookends. Going down here, you have your two bookends. These two gave us Revolution, Civil War. This one gives us also In God We Trust. This one gives us In God We Trust. We didn't really touch on this one. I put it up there, but because it's connected by the 126 to 2014. So, and we went through the Millerite history as well with the parable of the 10 virgins. We briefly kind of did that as a quick review, how we got midpoint, July 21. I think everybody is okay with that. And then the other point that was come out of great controversy is how we had, for a long time, been understanding it to be midnight, midnight cry, Sunday law. Make sure I say it right and I don't get it. But we've learned through the great controversy in chapter 18 that it's Sunday law, loud cry, close of probation. And so that's how we came up with understanding the correct structure and putting it into, using the Millerite line and then putting it into our line. So what we're trying to show is how that number was developed, in which a little bit of challenging work to go through. This number was never developed in a study. This is coming up to the 2019 and November 9 date. It was never developed in a study or any concerted effort. Instead, it became unavoidable, and we kind of went through some of that yesterday, to see because of the histories that we're looking at now. It was more of a slow dawning over about 6 months, realizing that there was a pattern here that could not be ignored. We're trying to lead us through those patterns, and everybody's okay because we're used to that date now, November 9, 2019. So we'll go through it a little bit more, but we saw the November 9 in the German Revolution. We see the November 9 here, and there are other November 9s. And a lot of that, again, you can go back to that Google Time magazine, Donald Trump, and November 9, and you'll find that article. A lot of good information there. So we haven't established the year. We're trying to lead us through those patterns, but we haven't established the year. We've got the year from another study, and we're hoping to see November 9 as it is in history, the day itself. To see what we need to first recognize 2014, we saw that it was a midway point. We saw midpoints in 4 histories. I have 5 histories up here now. We saw the 4 yesterday, but I have another one up there now. And actually, we had a different. We didn't have this one up here yesterday, and we had this one as a different one. So there are many different places where you can get the midpoint. But like I said, only certain ones are connected by the symbols of the 2520. So we saw midpoints in 4 histories, and there are more. What are these 4 midway points? We had 1794. 1863, do your notes say 1954? I changed it to this one. We showed 1954, didn't go through the details because that was a couple weeks ago, but I changed, this is what I changed in your notes. So although it says 1954, that was a midpoint, but this is the one that actually leads you to 2014 via a symbol of the 2520. I hope that isn't confusing, and if there was, you can go back to the Brazil classes, In God We Trust, or you can find the ones that we did, the PowerPoint slides as well. Let's see, so, and what took us to these dates, what took us to 1794 or the French Revolution? We see that the 220, if you take 1794 all the way to 2014, you've got 220, and we went over that. What is 220? Restoration. And then we saw that it has bookend dates, 1789 and 1799. So these end dates here, that's what I color-coded in red going down the line. So 1863 is a midpoint in the Civil War right here. Where we saw 1863 to 2014 is the 151. And that's one of the ones I think that I had not right. So the 151, 1863 to 2014, they're 2 midway points, and they're connected by the 151. The 151 comes from the many, many tickle you farson. In many being 60 shekels, you take the 60, the 1, and the half. Adds up to 151. So I know I went that fast, but I think, okay. So then we had, we didn't cover these dates, and I don't think we're going to a whole lot here, but the 1888 history, the events that happened in here. The bookends 1888 were 1884 and 1892, and they are connected by the 126 as well. And we know that we had the Blair Bill. I think somebody else in one of their presentations was talking about the Blair Bill in this history here. So for 1954, though that was on last night's board, it's not on this board. You had 1952 and 1956. And that 63 does not take you there, so you can change that if you want in your own notes, but you have the page that I didn't correct the notes, I only corrected the board. So if anybody's confused, ask questions so that we get your notes corrected. I just, when this all happened, it was a rush to try to put together at least the board work, get it right. So then we observed that these 2 histories are what histories? These 2 histories here are what histories, because these ones give us particular information. The French Revolution and the Civil War. And that's why we got here for the first place, is for the revolutions. We're not going to call the American Civil War, we're going to call it revolution. And you will see that we do refer to it either way, but the idea was to get revolutions here. So in 1799 in French history, what happened? Napoleon. We gotta, let's see here. We can look at either 1799 or 1865, either one. You have a Napoleon as a dictator. You also have a death of a dictator here. For those that don't know, Abraham Lincoln did many of the same things that Trump is doing today when it came to the media, shutting down the media and various outlets to anybody that went against him. So in both histories, we can mark a leader of the country. There's a person that gets raised up or put down. So you have a going up here and you have a going down here. And they're both endpoints, marking an endpoint down there. So in 1865, you have the death of Abraham Lincoln. In 1799, the rising up of Napoleon. One point about these histories, we're not taking this as in a linear fashion. It's something that we repeatedly trip over in the concept of typology. We're encouraged to go back and watch Parminder's presentations in Italy, and particularly number 4 and 5, where he goes through typology and progression. And I did put a quick line up here to show the difference. It's not a part of this study, but just to show this is one linear fashion, but we're going to take and cut our lines. I figured out how to draw scissors. We cannot take 1799 and the rising up of Napoleon as a type of 2019 when it's laid out in this fashion. So in a line of progression, you can't say that this is a type of that because it's all on one line. And what is this line teaching? This is what we did when we went to 1863. We went to 1863 and picked up the language, "In God We Trust," in the Civil War. We went over that some last night. Or yesterday. 1861 is when the religious leaders went to Congress. They wanted to find a way to mark the money with something that would recognize God in this country. They wanted to recognize God, and the North was believing that they were losing the war because they didn't have God in their government. So they want to recognize God in this country by putting him on the coins. So 1863, the Congress passes a law. 1865, they start engraving it. So they put "In God We Trust," and then that also began again in the 50s. After you have the period of time here, after World War II, you have the period of time here with Roosevelt, where Roosevelt brings in the New Deal, puts restrictions on the businesses, and not just the pastors, but the businessmen as well, wanted to bring back this change again and start adding "In God We Trust" on all the money, which they eventually did. So that's what these histories are depicting in the 50s. So when we went to 1863, let's see, we had progression. So we weren't doing typology. As we continue to go through this, we're marking it as progression. So we're looking at this union of church and state as a work of progression through these lines. We obviously know you had the Blair Bill here. What were they doing? They were trying to make Sunday law. They're trying to make this a nation under God, and this progressive work leading down to here. So progression. So we weren't doing typology. We were marking progression. So if it's on one line, it's showing a progressive history. From 1863, we trace those phrases, "In God We Trust" and "Under God," that are coming to American culture progressively. We were forced to because we want to see the connection of the dates and the numbers. But to see 1799 as a type of 2019, what do we have to do on our line? We have to cut it. So for 1799 to be able to be a type of 2019, you cut the line. And then you can bring this line in this section under here. And then you have these things line up. You can do the same thing with the Civil War. So we're going to cut it 1799, 1865, 1892, and 1956. We're just for this purpose demonstrating these two here. After each history we cut it, and now we're just going to make the point of revolutions just these two, French Revolution and Civil War, and we're going to cut them out of history and overlay them into our history, 2001 to 2019. We've cut them out of time and overlaid them to see the history in this fashion is progression. To see history in this fashion, now you can use typology and types. So when you cut the line, first we have progression right here, and then when you cut the line, now you have progression or typology. So you can come down and compare those lines that way. So we have progression and types. We cut off our histories, took the French Revolution, 1789, 1794 to 1799, and we're overlaying them with our history. The focus point is now the end point. We took the American Civil War and did the same thing with that history, 1861, 63 to 65. And then we notice that it's November 9, 1799, that Napoleon is raised up. And he marks the end of the French Revolution. So, again, I marked the end points, and I put my scissors in red. I thought that would help us. The end points here that we cut out of here and to put them under there. And now we're looking at typology. We see here that this date here, we added over here yesterday, was November 9, when Napoleon declares that the French Revolution has ended, and he is now a dictator. So you have a dictator. If you're looking typology now, you're going to see a dictator here at 2019. You're going to see the death of a dictator out of the Civil War, the death of a dictator, and the rise of a dictator. So it was a military coup that overthrew the Directory. They instituted a new constitution, established a central government. They had a number of constitutions in the years previously. This was the first constitution since the Declaration of the Rights of Man. It included no declaration of rights. So we had 10 years of revolution, and people are tired of it, and they want a wise and firm government. So they are content to submit to a dictator. We don't just see the establishment of a dictatorship, we see changes to their constitution, and it takes away the rights of the people. So we know that what we're saying here then at 9/11, we're seeing based on these lines, based on the endpoints, that we have revolution here. And now there's going to be an overturning of the government. There's going to be a death of a dictator and a rise of a dictator. The French Revolution and the American Civil War, we spoke about the death of Abraham Lincoln as well as Napoleon. Why are we content to see the death of a dictator? And why do we see the death of a dictator also at the same waymark? We have the death and life. Why do we see that?
Same dictator, same person, different positions.
Yeah, and we're going to get to that a little bit later too. Yeah, so you see a death and a rising of a dictator. And you guys have this page on your additional one. And I guess I will flip this since you're just for a quick second, and we'll pull this board back up. But I put this one on the board so that we have it. Okay, so those that have your notes. So this, what I did, because it was confusing with the 1954 date, I went ahead and got this history to throw it into this particular study. So prayerfully, it all goes well and we'll understand it. But I found what the Brazil class did have 1954 showing the 63 date, so I needed to correct it a little bit more than it got corrected. So I thought we would just go through this piece of history here to get this midway point. Because in our previous last week or the week before, when we went through these lines, we had 1954, and it does show us a progression and a midpoint. But it does not connect us via symbols of the 2520. 1951 does. And I didn't draw all that up there. But, okay, so in 1948, you have the phrase being introduced, under God for the first time. As per coming back to the Gettysburg Address, which was back in 1863, correct? And I only took out the snippet, but a little bit more of it is there. But that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom. Does anybody see anything wrong with what that statement says?
Birth of freedom? Under God. Under God.
Are you free when you're under God?
No.
Let's say you're an atheist, and this is a nation under God. Are you free?
No.
So if you go back to the Dark Ages, the 1260s, and it's a nation under Catholic God, are you free?
No.
So it's not supposed to be that way. So while Abraham Lincoln had it right on slavery, he had it wrong on this. They had it wrong on this. So also marking 1948 was also when the World Council of Churches was first.
Didn't we read, was it in Ellen White, or was it in that National Reform Movement study where Lincoln was talking about the Jesuits?
We've read that, but not in any of our studies. It wasn't in any of my studies, but we've read it a lot of times because he knew about the Jesuits and what they did and all that, yeah. So you think that he should have known?
No, I'm not wondering if that's like a conspiracy theory part of him like Trump is.
Oh yeah, it's interesting.
I don't know. I was just wondering.
Because he did know what they were.
He was blaming them though for this
Yeah, you're right.
North and South War, so I don't know if that was like a conspiracy.
Because they were funding the South,
Yeah.
correct? They were funding the South.
I don't know.
Oh, that's an interesting thought.
Do we have proof on that?
Huh?
Do we have proof on that?
Well, it's a quote by Abraham Lincoln. A bunch of us have seen it many, many times. That they were funding it?
What he said.
Oh, yeah, I don't know. That they were funding it? That's not an area that I've dug deeper on.
So it could be a conspiracy theory, like she said.
Yeah, which is interesting. Well, it's like the parallels continue to explode, right? You can't even get through one study without more that needs to go. So, okay, so 1865 was an endpoint. That's flipped over. I don't think I have that on this board. But anyway, so 151 from 2019 is 1868. 1868 doesn't take you via a to 2019. I don't want to say that wrong. It is 151. It is 151, but it takes you to 2019, not 2014. That's why it was kind of confusing, because we're doing dates that take us to 2014 via the 2520 symbols, but this one is marking a date that takes you to 2019. So the amount of evidence, if you stick through it and go through all these classes and watch and see all these connections, see all these histories, see all these parallels. So this particular, from a different study, she was showing from 1956 to 2019 is the 151. And then she was showing sorry, got the wrong one on there for you. Again. She's showing, yeah, just the 63s on this one. So you guys got it more right than I do. We got a 63 there, right? And then from 1956 here, you have a 63. And both dates are symbols of the 2520. We know from the 1260, the half, where you half it. And she went through those studies where you half everything and you wind up. So with the 151 and the 126, you can go. You're doing my math again?
Why did they both 63s going to the same way?
Yeah, you have.
Thank you. Thank you. I really need help up here making sure we keep it straight. Okay, so 1951 to 2014. Correct?
Yes.
And this one goes to 2019. Okay, better. Thank you. So, so there's a lot of them that connect. And what I was praying about this morning and last night is that certainly I can be a failure as an instrument myself personally, but the Lord will show us all the lines. So that's what my prayer was, is that we would all benefit from the lines, not me, because there's faultiness in me. But the lines will speak to us if we can get them right. So, but the lines on your drawing is right, and now we have it corrected up there. So the lines will speak to us as we continue to see these histories. And going back for our brother, one of our brothers back here, that when it comes to the 2520, how do we get all those? And we just roughly did the many, many tickle you farson. But the 126 is a symbol of the 1260. It's a tenth. If you can go to Isaiah 7, you'll see that a tenth was going to be a remnant, right? So he pulls out this remnant, and that tenth is that period of time. And like I said, there's a lot of connections, but that tenth was a period of time from 1863 to, correct me if I do it, 1989, correct? The 126. So there are a lot of connections, but you can't cover every one of those connections in every single study. But that tenth would be your 1863, which what happened in 1863? To internal and external.
Oh, the church.
Internal was charges,
Yeah, they rejected the charge.
and then external was.
Your civil war, and in God we trust. So both the, huh?
That's for the 151.
Well, to 1989, it's the 126. Sorry, off the study again. 1863 to 1989 is the 126. Somebody wants, huh? Yeah, it's a different study. I was just kind of doing it for Brother Dennis back here too, because there's a lot of details that he's missing. I thought we'll put that one out there, probably to confuse us more. Sorry, but 1989 or 1863 to 1989 is a tenth. It's a remnant. So out of the church, God would pull a remnant. In 1989, He raises up this movement, and it goes from there. There's a whole lot more to learn in between that. So, anyways, we also had in 1951 here the movement. They actually begin to introduce it here based on what the under God phrase, not in God we trust, but under God phrase, which they actually pull from here, which means there's not freedom if that's there. So in 1951, it actually begins. The Knights of Columbus is when the movement actually begins. In 1948, they first suggested it. And then also for the Pledge of Allegiance on this one, the Pledge of Allegiance to God. So now you're going to pledge your allegiance under God. So now every student, atheist, Buddhist, Catholic, whatever faith you are, you have to pledge your allegiance to God if you're going to be in this nation. So is that freedom? Okay. So, okay, we'll flip back over now. Okay. So we talked about the sixth and seventh heads. That's in previous studies that we've done as well. We have Sunday law, and we connected it to Acts 27. We roughly went through some of that history, how we got to Acts, what Acts 27 opened up with the two ships, the story of the two ships. So what this is, what waymark is this? We had Midnight Cry, Panium, we know to be Panium. We're not going to go into details of that, but we can refer back to other presentations to explain that more thoroughly. But we found in the story of the ship line, we know that we have Midnight Cry, which is Panium, after Raphia, and then Sunday Law. So in between this period of time, we're going to discuss here real quick. So Midnight Cry, but we place Sunday Law here. We have Midnight Cry, and we call Sunday Law, what do we call Sunday Law now? For the ships.
Oh, shipwreck.
Yeah, shipwreck.
Close of probation.
Close of probation. Sunday Law is close of probation. For the ship, for the two ships, the United States and the institution, not the people. Not the people, but the story of Acts 27, the two ships, so this is the story of the two ships, the institutions, not the people. So then we have Panium as the Midnight Cry, and we talked about what was happening in the United States at the sixth head. It was going down, and what was going up. The United Nations, where the seventh head was going up. And this is the history of the United States, which began back in 1798. We trace it through its history, and we see it ends at Sunday Law. It's the ship that is wrecked, and this is going into Paul's, we're not going to go into those details, but Paul's, the shipwreck, when then he goes to the island, okay? At Sunday Law, he goes to the island. So the United States began in 1798. We traced it through history, and we see its end at Sunday Law. It's the ship that wrecked, and then we saw that the United Nations that then rules the world. What does the UN look like, and who enforces the Sunday Law? The United States. So you've got the sixth head going down. This is the United States. And you've got the seventh head going up. Now we have always, many of us understood it to be the UN as we know it today from all the conspiracy theories, which is why we need to not be listening to conspiracy theories. We need to be letting the lines tell us what is happening. So the lines are telling us, when you go back into Revelation 13, where this nation was raised up to with two horns like a lamb, republicanism and Protestantism. Do you have a question?
Yeah, because it was actually also false doctrine of the UN. We read it wrong.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So Revelation 13, you have two horns like a lamb, republicanism and Protestantism. And what happens? What's the transition? What happens at the seventh head? Speaks like a dragon, right? So what beast is that speaks like a dragon? The lamb. So you've got the lamb, the two, we know the horns. There's history as to where these horns broke, but we know now it's going to come to its complete fall as we know it. And it will no longer have those horns, and it will now, going forward, speak like a dragon. So what is it over here? Huh? Yeah, it's a beast, but what beast is it? What? Huh?
If it's on this side, it's still lamb, isn't it?
It's the United States. Yeah. All those answers are good. It's the United States. So what is it over here?
United States.
Speaking like a dragon. So you also can mark here, Lincoln dies, Napoleon rises. So you have one going down and you have one going up. Dictator. So if you have a dictator here that dies and a dictator here that rises up, you have the United States here that dies and rises up in a new form, the same U.S. in a new form. So who is here and who is here? Trump. Trump is a dictator. He dies here and he raises up with more power, unrestrained. So in India right now we see they're setting up their own Donald Trump. They're in a significant turning point in their nation, one of the most populated countries in the world, and they're being brought back to religion from the government. The religion there is Hinduism, and they don't want a Sunday law. So why is there a Sunday law spreading into all those countries after Sunday law? So why are all these other nations going to listen to the United States? Why would India follow the lead of a dead country?
Because they'll be threatened with tariffs if they don't. Yeah.
So it's not the United States that dies, right? It's just changes entities. It's going to listen to the United States. Why is the UN now wielding such power? Who has the power? The United States, because from Panium, the king of the South is decreasing. Spheres of influence. Brought that up. So the spheres of influence. So when you have in this period of time as well, we know that at Raphia, which is not on here, which is November 9, we know that the king of the South has a win, right? And can we not see great humiliation and egg on the United States face right now for what is happening, right? So we're experiencing, there's a whole lot of details to that, but we're experiencing this loss, this defeat. Trump is experiencing this loss and defeat, but he's going to come back. And at Panium, he strikes, and the king of the South, Russia, loses his spheres of influence. And when he loses his spheres of influence, his protectors that keep us restrained, when Russia loses his spheres of influence, which are keeping us restrained, then the United States is risen up with unrestraint. No longer is Russia a threat. Just like when you go back to 1989, you had the struggle between the two superpowers. We're seeing that struggle between two superpowers again. We've gone through a lot of that history in the previous studies. So we're seeing that same struggle for power between the two superpowers. But it's all over spheres of influence and information warfare. So in this period of time here, beginning here, Russia experiences a defeat. Russia is also receives a deadly wound. That's in several studies that we've done. And go back to Brazil to watch those classes. Russia receives a deadly wound, and then it dies at Sunday law. So when it dies at Sunday law, it can no longer hide behind the countries or the countries that he's supporting and has influence over. Just when you go back to 1989 and you look at what the USSR was prior to, when it had all those other countries and areas that it was over and had that influence, it's losing all that influence of all these countries. And that's why what's happening in Syria today, in Turkey, and all the other surrounding areas is so vital to what is happening. You can trace those histories back on as Sister Victoria showed, you can trace it on the threads. You can trace through all those histories and see these same countries all the way through. So we talked about Venezuela and how Russia is propping up these governments worldwide. Syria, Venezuela, North Korea. The king of the South is defeated and it starts to fall. By Sunday law, it no longer has spheres of influence. It's a death and a deadly wound. For the king of the South to die completely, all it needs to do is to place the United States in this position is to lose its spheres of influence. So when we get to Sunday law history, the United States controls the United Nations. It's ruling as a different type of power than it did from 1798 to Sunday law. And they are speaking, and are they speaking different languages? It's the dragon saying something different. Is the dragon saying something different? Because you have the dragon, the beast, and false prophet. Are they speaking anything different? They're speaking the same language. So, and we trace back in some of the history as well with Mikhail Gorbachev, where he actually was the first one that used the phrase New World Order. His idea of New World Order was put out, and his idea was that it would be multilateral, that it wouldn't just be one power, one nation over everybody, that it would be multilateral. But we know from history, going back to the Bushes, going back prior to, that they wanted a unilateral. When Bush Sr. used then the phrase New World Order, it was not a multilateral union that he wanted. He wanted the United States over everything.
You're either against me, with me, or against me.
You're either with me or against me. And that's what they succeed to accomplish here. That's things that Clinton and Obama were tearing down in these histories from 1989 on, when we had the Democrats in office. They were tearing down the work that the Republicans were doing to get to this point. So most of you know that watch my presentations, I do include every now and then the interaction with the students, because sometimes they're actually giving what she would have said. So there was a question, they were wanting clarification. What I'm understanding is that the United States is continuing, it's just a different face, and it's not the UN. The UN is just united and they have no agenda. The only reason they're there is because they're forced by the United States and Donald Trump. And grappling with this is the one that was asking, because I always understood Revelation 17, it says that the kings give their power to the beast. In Revelation 17, it says that they are united of one mind. So we need clarification. So she says, I can give something, but how willing do I give it? If I'm in a country with a dictator and he says, you have to give me something or there's going to be significant punishment, and I've just seen my protector fall to him, he's just killed the one shield that I have, his sphere of influence, then I follow, but not willingly. No country is going to follow willingly. They want their autonomy. And what does that look like? So we also didn't really discuss it, but we talked about the internal and the external. If we were to place the internal over this history, what are we discussing? The story of the ship means two things. We also see Adventism from 1798 to Sunday law. So we talked about that just briefly. You have the story of the two ships of Acts 27. Does Adventism cease to exist after Sunday law? No. Internal and internal must agree. So if the USA continues only with a new entity, as a new entity, then you've got the SDA Church here. It's Sunday law, not November 9, 2019. The waymarks are lined up for different purposes. But if the USA, if it continues on, then it's the SDA continues on. We also see Adventism from 1798 to the Sunday law. Do they continue? No. External and internal must agree. Internally, Adventism goes all the way through, but there are some marked changes in its leadership. What's happening in this history is the visible rising of a new type of leadership, 1989 all the way through. Ellen White's very specific in this history between the midnight cry and the shipwreck of the ship that Paul, even though he's a prisoner, is now the boss. You read that in Acts 27. Paul's in charge, not the Pharisees, right? But Adventism and the United States continue all the way through. So we went to this model to discuss Napoleon and Abraham, and why did we do that? What lesson can we get about the death of Abraham Lincoln? We see the death of the United States, then the rise of the United States as a different type of power. What we are marking is different stages of its life cycle of the United States. Because we discussed Abraham Lincoln briefly, and what is he? He's a dictator. So Abraham Lincoln, and then we have Napoleon, right? Lincoln dies, Napoleon rises. We can take Sunday law, and it's a close of probation. And it's a close of probation, then if it's a close of probation, then also it's a close of probation for the priests, and we can overlay that history. So that's how she brings November 9 down here. It's a close of probation. We know that our close of probation is November 9, so you can overlay it in this history. So we see the death of a nation, but it's just starting a new stage of existence. We've also known it as more power past the Sunday law. It has more power than it had after the Sunday law. So if you mark November 9 here, you're seeing this rising up of the church triumphant, which is going to continue to go, or the church triumphant here after November 9, 2019. Anyways, it continues to rise up. So, but it's under new leadership, and who put the leadership in place? Could somebody answer it? Who's it? God. When we discuss the president and see a death and a rising up, we combine these two thoughts, and what did we decide about what we can expect to see? Is this a new person? And is it the end of Donald Trump? So if we think about Donald Trump and his age and his health, we know that he's worse than Clinton when it comes to food. When Clinton was, then he went through his transition, stopped going to McDonald's and all that, right? So but God can do anything, right? As the other side says, that it's God that raises up kings and takes them down, right? So if the lines tell us Donald Trump is going all the way through, Donald Trump is going all the way through. So we can see a resurrection. What we're doing is taking this concept of November 9, when we take it into history, we see that as this point in time. We see both the fall of a dictator and the rise of a dictator. We need to consider how we conceptualize that when we bring it into our history, November 9, as opposed to Pandium Sunday Law. We're looking at November 9. Where we went to was the Sunday Law, and we talked about the 6th and the 7th heads and what that looked like. So at this close of probation, at the Sunday Law, the United States falls as the 6th head, but then the 7th head rises. The United States is still there with more power than it had before. Using the current close of probation, we bring that to Raphia and see the death of Abraham Lincoln and the rise of Napoleon. So I don't have it on here, but we'll mark it, that this November 9 that we're talking about, that we're lining up in our history, because this is the big line history, and this is our history at 2019, and it's Raphia. We see the death of Abraham Lincoln and the rise of Napoleon. I don't know how much time I have. We have a ways to go, so I just wanted to check.
When do we end? Because we started.
Huh? 15 minutes? So how can we understand the death of a dictator? Is Donald Trump going to die? No, he's not going to die. So why do we see Abraham Lincoln's assassination? We can take it back to our other history. We discussed the United States, what the death of the 6th head looked like, and the rise of the 7th. Bring that into Donald Trump, and there's a revolution that ends at Raphia. So you come up here, there's going to be this is revolution. It ends at Raphia. Does the United States end at Sunday Law? No. So does Donald Trump end at November 9? No. They continue on. We can see the death of the United States. It's already a type of a dictator. You can take that all the way back to probably 1989. Definitely going forward with the Bushes, when they said you're either with us or against us. And I've shared this with a few people. I was straight out of the world. I didn't pay attention to history. I didn't pay attention to anything. But I had people saying to me that the United States was the bully of all the nations. And I knew nothing, so other than what I might have heard growing up. And if they're a bully, it's like, well, if you don't like it, leave, right? I knew nothing. And so when I'm looking at this history, we really are. We've been a bully all along. Been a bully, being a dictator all along. So we see the fall of the United States. It's already a dictator, but they're rising as a new form in a different stage of its life cycle. So when we see the death of a dictator and the rising up of a dictator, what's happening to Donald Trump here at November 9? He continues as a dictator, but he comes back even stronger with less restraint. less restraint upon him. He's a dictator. Huh? He's a new form of a dictator. He has more power. He's a dictator, and correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't Raffia, is it Raffia or Midnight Cry? Raffia is the end of the war on the Western Front, right? Is that right?
No, it's Sunday law.
Sunday law? The Western Front?
The Western Front on the U.S., between Trump and the U.S., because of Sunday law, he gets all the power. No,
Okay.
stopping him.
Okay. I thought we marked some of that at Raffia, but okay.
That's the Eastern Front.
Okay. Think about that. Okay. So he continues as a dictator, but he comes back even stronger with less restraint. He's a dictator in this history here, and he's going to be a dictator with new powers, less restraint after November 9. So we're marking stages of his life cycle. You're seeing stages of his life cycle. You're also seeing stages of the life cycle of the United States. So Abraham Lincoln is marking the revolution, and Napoleon is marking a counter-revolution. Yeah. Was a dictator? I don't have those notes in front of me, but what I do recall from it, he also shut down the media. Anybody that spoke against him, he jailed them. And I know there's more. Maybe somebody else remembers the other details. There were other similarities, but those are the key ones.
It was the states that wanted to secede from the nation. I mean, the first martial law.
Okay, there you go. Yeah. So thank you. So is there a period of time between these two when we bring them into our history, Abraham Lincoln and Napoleon? What is the counter-revolution fighting? So we're going to see on here, we did see briefly last night, that there's a counter-revolution here. They go through a period of preparation, and then there's a counter-revolution. So what are they fighting? They're fighting to fight the previous revolution. So this counter-revolution that's going to begin after here, because you're going to have a period of preparation and a counter-revolution, they're fighting this period here. So the previous revolution ended at a point in time where a dictator was placed. So we have the previous revolution ends at a point in time, right? And a dictator is now going to be in place. The old system of government died, and they have a new dictator. A counter-revolution is to take him down. That is why we can see the death of Abraham Lincoln, and he's not the only dictator we're going to see fall. We're going to see other ones, actually the next one that we'll discuss, and that's Kaiser Wilhelm, and we briefly touched on him last night. We're going to refer to an article in Time magazine. This is the one that I was talking about. This is just one of those times where the date was impossible to ignore. It's titled Donald Trump and the 9th of November. I think I said November 9th of November. If you want to look it up. It was written November 16, 2016, a week after his election. This is the secular world, right? This is the Stones crying out because we didn't know what was happening. But the Stones knew, are seeing what's happening. It's a fascinating department of Time magazine. This part is only online, and they use historians to take histories in the past to explain the present. They are historians that write about news, and what this historian did was take the election of Donald Trump into German history. It says on the morning of November 9 in 2016, Donald Trump secured his election to the presidency, and people immediately started connecting Donald Trump with German history. The main one, and were we doing that? Immediately?
No.
Francisco was? Praise the Lord. I knew no history.
It's like,
Some people knew those histories. Yeah, I knew no history. So the main one they were connecting to was the night of Kristallnacht. And again, on the slideshows, you can get those off the website, and I emailed them to everybody on the email list, so the slideshows are there, and all the links are there. If you need help finding the links, you can click on the links in those. So this was the night of broken glass when violent persecution against the Jews really took off. Also the fall of the Berlin Wall, 1989, which we'll discuss. This article takes it further back than that, and they say that there was a November 9 in German history that made the other November 9th possible. This was the end of World War I. World War I ended because of a revolution in Germany. How did that revolution begin? They were losing the war. We talked about this yesterday. It was inevitable. What did they want to do with their navy? They wanted to make their navy go down in glory. They wanted this glorious destruction, this final battle, partly so the English wouldn't get their ships. So we're going to go back to this side of the board now again. So how did the sailors feel about that? How would you feel about that? You fight for your country, they're going to fight, right? So they're being told, you're all going to go and die in vain just to give glory to your country, some pointless exercise. They refused to do that, so they rose up the 30th of October, which we marked here yesterday, and sparked an 11-day revolution, spread across Germany, and on November 9, 1918, right here, thousands in Berlin marched to the barracks. Some of those in the barracks threw down their arms and opened the gates and refused to oppose the revolution. They've been fighting everyone else, and they won't fight against their own people. Because of that, the Kaiser was forced to abdicate, and that was the end of the monarchy. And this, let's see, this is our other dictator that we see fall on November 9. So we see the death of Abraham Lincoln, 1865, but not a November 9 date. 1799, November 9, we see the death of, or the rise of a dictator. And November 9, 1918, we see the death of a dictator. Then we see a new leader rise up, but there's more than one faction behind the government. So there's a struggle when you overturn your government because everybody wants to jump in and be in charge, to have their own government put in place. So there's also the Spartacists, and that's what we marked here. In this time of preparation, you've got this other revolution that takes place here. There's also the Spartacists. More than one power declared that they had the right to to the government. It's Frederick Ebert that takes power. He's opposed. Those that are opposing him take time to rally their forces, so there's a preparation time. There's not a counter-revolution until early that next year. So they're in a preparation time, and then the counter-revolution begins here, January 5th, 1919. That leads to May 19, 1919. It takes the period a few months before it's fully taken down, and this is the history of in Bavaria. So we have this period here of revolution. And then you have this period here of the counter-revolution. And there are some extra notes in here that you can read, references that are pulled in here about what happened in the Bavarian incident here. So you've got this death of this dictator, or he abdicates. Frederick Ebert comes in. But there are others, the Spartacists, that are wanting to take control of the government. So then there's this period of preparation, and then there's a counter-revolution. So we'll go back to our article, the Time Magazine article. It's talking about November 9 in German history. And they're discussing all the other ones, but they're saying this is the one that makes the others possible. This end of World War I, they're saying that this is the one that makes Donald Trump, his election, possible. Let me make sure I read that correctly. We're discussing the other ones, but we're saying that this is the one that makes the others possible. This end of World War I with the abdication of Kaiser. It cleared the way for the armistice, which was 2 days later, November 11th, and the Versailles Treaty. The conditions of that treaty led to political and economic chaos that finally culminated in the rising of Hitler in 1933. The article makes an interesting statement. We discussed periods of the life cycle of Donald Trump as president. We saw Sunday law. There's a transition. We can see November 9 that there's a transition. So you got a transition with the United States, and November 9, 2019, we're going to have a transition with our leadership. This article is saying that this fall of the Kaiser represents the election of Donald Trump, a victory over the establishment in both parties. It says it represents the death of that old order, and we don't know what's going to replace it. So this is being said in the Time Magazine article. It's the death of an old order, and we don't know what's going to replace it. So this article is saying that November 9, Kaiser Wilhelm, represents November 9, 2016, which is the election of Donald Trump. They're saying the old order died in 2016. That's what the article is saying. And a new order is coming up. So November 9, 2016, we see another change in the United States. And what we saw was ipsis. Everybody remember ipsis? I don't know if I have room to put ipsis on here. And we've studied a lot of these in the classes. So bear with me just a second here. Oh, and I have a mistake on there. Maybe somebody catch my mistake on that one. I don't want to write that up there because I have it wrong. I think I have two things confused on there again. Well, we know we've studied the Battle of Ipsus. We know that was 2016, where they're in alliance, right? Where the Putin and Trump are in alliance. So let's see here. So it says it represents the death of that old order. And what are we going to place it with? They're saying the old order died and the new order is coming up. So November 9, 2016, we see another change in the United States. And we saw the Battle of Ipsus, where they're in an alliance. We mark the death of Antigonus. When we go back into that history, where did we get the history of Antigonus? From the Pyrrhic Wars, right? From the Diadochi Wars. When you go back into that history in Daniel, where Daniel goes from Alexander's death to the four generals, it's the history in between. And that's where we see Antigonus. And I'm not as up on that as Adriana is, but Antigonus was building his own, wanted to build the whole empire, and he wanted to keep Alexander's kingdom all together. Correct? Yeah, and Daniel 11. Yeah, Daniel 8 and Daniel 11. So he's wanting to keep the whole kingdom united under him. And there's a lot of other studies on that. Those ones I haven't done myself in this detail, so I struggle with these ones. So we see that we mark the death of Antigonus and the death of the establishment, the breaking of the horn of republicanism. Again, we can see another stage of its cycle. And why did we see the death of the horn here at 2016?
Antigonus lost
His other eye, yeah. But who was Antigonus in the model that we did? And there were two perspectives. In this perspective, who was Antigonus? Hillary Clinton. And who was Demetrius, his son? Trump. And Demetrius had somebody helping him. Pyrrhus. Right. So Pyrrhus is Putin. Demetrius was Trump. And Antigonus, Clinton, and Trump were both vying for the three powers of the U.S. government, the three allies. So at 2016, when Trump won, the establishment lost. The old order lost. The establishment of, you had the Democrats and the Republicans, and the Democrats are generally the ones that are doing what? Fighting for liberty, true liberty. Because the Republicans are fighting for liberty too. Liberty to be a Christian in this nation under God. Where the Democrats were the ones that were maintaining the separation of church and state. So we lost that battle in 2016. It's the death of an old order. And the same thing happened with Antigonus when Antigonus was then defeated. Yeah, we can wrap up if you want, and I don't know if we'll have to cut it off here. I don't know if we'll finish it or not, so because Kathy's going to be up next. So, yeah, it was probably too much more. So we'll leave it, and we can discuss it all in the breaks if you want to do that. And then we'll close in prayer. Gracious Father in heaven, Lord, this is a lot of information, and some of us have even been doing it for a long time, and it's a lot of information. But we're so thankful and blessed for your great mercy and your loving kindness with us and towards us, Father, that you are helping us to put all these lines together piece by piece. You've taken us through a journey, Father, our little local group through a journey, and others are doing the same thing in their own studies to just take it piece by piece, learn each piece, And as we do, we start seeing connections. And I just want to praise you and thank you for the study last night, because had we perhaps not known so many things that we've been learning over these last several months, that we would not have listened to that chapter that Sister Kathy was reading that has so many connections that all of us were seeing. We could not see or make those connections without all of these lines. So you are bringing all these lines together. And it is such a privilege, because we understand, Father, that this is a narrow path, and we are eventually going to only hold on to the cord and swing across, and that cord is all these lines put together, and that cord gets bigger and bigger and bigger until it will sustain us, and it is you that holds that cord and swing us across that abyss. Each one of us, Father, want to be swinging across that cord. Whatever bloodiness we must endure, whatever sacrifice we must endure, help us to trust that we can do all things in Christ who strengthens us. And that we can trust you to hold that cord and bring us through. Whatever we must empty ourselves of, Lord, help us to come to every test. Help us to come to the place where Abraham did. When you asked him to slay his only son, he knew your voice. He knew your voice, and he was ready to obey on command. And that's the kind of faith we want to have if we're to be used to help the people of this world to come out of darkness, to come out of captivity, and join this movement and be saved. We are so thankful. We praise you, and we thank you, and we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.